La Feria Internacional del Libro de Guadalajara presenta ¿Quién rayos fue Marie Curie? Con Rosa Montero en La Fil también es ciencia. La escritora española relatará la fascinante trayectoria de Marie Curie, científica ganadora de los premios Nobel de Física y Química. Rosa Montero ha sido galardonada por su trabajo literario con el Premio Nacional de las Letras y el Premio de Honor del Festival Panamá Negro, entre muchos otros, y ha sido colaboradora de diversos medios informativos en Europa y América Latina.
Also Latin American awards and recognitions. Good morning. Good morning in Mexico. Good afternoon in Spain. It's a pleasure to welcome digital attendees from all over the world that are now logged in. We have this project, Who on Earth Is? And we have Who the Heck Is? We, of course, changed it somehow. And this started 3 years ago with Hanosh Gutenfront, the scientist, speaking about Einstein. This was 2017, and Jose Feijó, biologist, who talked about Darwin the following year, and Brigitte Baptiste, the biologist, talked about Humboldt's view. This is in Latin America, the view of Humboldt in Latin America. So when we go much in depth, these characters' lives, we came about this session. This is something that really calls the attention of all the attendees, and this is the International Book Fair. The field is also science. Rosa Montero, who has been a friend of the International Book Fair in Guadalajara for so many years, and she is part of the literary program, now honors us by being part of the science dissemination program, and she will talk about Marie Curie from a different standpoint. This is a French nationalized Polish that, in addition to physics and chemistry Nobel Prizes, was the first woman that was a professor. She was a professor at the University of Paris, and we now know that most of the faculty members and academia centers are wonderful women that share their knowledge with all of us. In the past months, we can read news about women that has discovered something in the astronomical world or health-related issues. And when we go over the news, we come to understand that women have this merit, and it has to be normal. And we hope that soon the surprise when it comes to research and innovation and findings is not gender dependent. Let's welcome this wonderful, crazy writer that is part of us. She has cried tears, and she has devoted her heart to literature. And we will hear from her today, and it's a pleasure. Thank you, Laura Niembro, dear friend and highly admired. And it's your idea, the title of this type of event. So Who the Heck is Marie Curie? Is great. I love it. It's a funny title. It's a funny way to start, and it's perfect. It's perfect for this story. Because Marie Curie was, without any doubt, an unknown person, a totally unknown person. As a matter of fact, she still is unknown by so many. I now have the full screen, and I would like to take an opportunity to thank the International Book Fair. The field is my second home. Maybe I have been at the field 15 times, and I miss it so much. I love it, but at least we are connected remotely, but we are connected. Anyhow, as I was saying, the title is perfect. Perfect. It's not only funny, but it's the proper one. Marie Curie is still an incognitus. We have no idea who she is. We think that we might know about her. Of course, we understand that there's no smile in any picture when it comes to her biography. And I wrote a book that is called The Ridiculous Idea of Never Seeing You Again. And that's why I'm here today. And I speak about her. I talk about her throughout the book. And I mention the fact that there were no pictures of her smiling. And a reader sent a picture, and there was a very mild smile, the only picture I have ever encountered in my career. And it's kind of like, tilting, kind of like a Madonna type of smile. But this is the only time I have ever seen her smile. Now, the official Marie Curie is a serious lady, a scientist, a brain. We all know her. Cold, brain, controlling, and a genius at all times. Overwhelming from any standpoint. But there's an epic story when it comes to radius isolation. And this is true, of course. We will talk about this more in detail a little ahead. She discovered radium, and this is under very complicated situation she went through. And this is part of her doctorate thesis. Her dissemination would have to do with radium and related issues. And she was already with Pierre. We will talk about this. We will go back to this a bit ahead. She didn't even have a lab to work at. And Pierre, her beloved Pierre, found a warehouse. It was actually a warehouse that was old, and crystals were all broken. And it was in no way the proper way to work at. But that's the place where they actually had this laboratory set, and they were at 5 degrees. This is Celsius, and they were freezing, and there was dust, of course, and water, of course, coming in because of the rain. And the problem was the contamination of the experiments, and that was a serious situation, of course. And my theory is that she was anorexic. I have insisted on that, and there's a heroic topic with this regard. She had no money, so she had to boil 20 tons of pec blenda. Pec blenda is from where radium emerged. And she was a good sorcerer, a witch, if you will. And she had this big container, and she was mixing it with an iron clad or an iron tube, and she was mixing it. It was kind of like a pail, and she was mixing it all the time. And then pec blenda turned into radium. This is part of the story, of course. This is part of what we think we know about Marie Curie. I thought I knew her, as many people do. And there's a prologue in one of my books that talk about women, and I include biographies. And Marie Curie's biography was part of that book. And once in my life, I was kind of like blocked. Elena Ramirez from Sex Barrel, my publisher, all of a sudden sent a diary, a 28-page diary that Marie Curie had worked on when Pierre Curie passed away. In 1906, he was rolled over by a horse-ridden cart, and he died immediately. And that was a serious event in Marie Curie's life. It was 28 pages, not 29. I correct myself, 28 pages. And when I read that diary, it was going into her most inner part, devastating stories. This is the Marie Curie I thought I knew, older, more complex than I ever imagined. And I started reading other biographies and looked into the actual Marie Curie. A totally different one came about, more interesting than the official saint that we all know. We know that she was born in 1867. So her youth during the second part of the 18th century, that is a very bad stage for women, especially bad for women. And her personal life was terrible. She was the youngest of five, one boy, and the other siblings were sisters, and her parents were professors, intellectuals, both in Poland, Varsovia, that was occupied by the Russians, so they couldn't even speak Polish. So, as most of the countries in Warsaw, it was not possible for women to go to universities. In Spain, the first year when women could go to the university to actually take places was 1911, to actually take classes at any universities. In most of the countries didn't allow women to go to classes. So she concluded her initial stage of her educational background when she was 14, and she was a great writer. There was a time when she decided that she could write as a novelist, but fortunately she went on another road, the scientific road. There are some books when she was 60 speaking about herself, and when you were 14, it's no longer possible to study. We're talking about a brain here, brain that, of course, relates to the most magnificent part of the story that we know of, and it was not possible for her to continue studying. So at night, it was not possible for her to go anywhere, so she studied at night. And I quote, some women had gone to St. Petersburg or abroad, and I started on my own to actually keep on my studies. Can you picture this girl that heard that some women had the opportunity to go to St. Petersburg or abroad? It was kind of like listening to a unicorn that is a winged unicorn. It's ephemeris. It's so light, so not possible. So this is what was going on in her mind. She ended up understanding that it could be possible to study in Paris. She had no money to go to Paris. So with Bronia, her sister, that wanted to become a physician, older than Marie, both created an alliance. So the only thing that she could do, given her socioeconomic status, would be part of a family, a rich family, a wealthy family, and working with them so that she could send money to Bronia and help her for her education as a physician. So this is what happened. She was teaching back then and helping these wealthy families with education to their children. And she was part of a Polish aristocratic family, and she fell in love with the son, Casimir Tarowski, that turns out to be one of the most important Polish fanatics. He was a mathematician, one of the most important mathematicians in the era. And Tarowski fell in love with her, but his parents, when they found out that this young boy would fall in love with a girl from nowhere, where, they screamed. They screamed up in the air and they said, no way. And he, of course, was not able to pursue his dream. Now, the situation here is that Marie Curie was not aware of how bright she was. In fact, she was borderline depressed, a self-destructive type of depression. And this was kind of like an answer to the very harsh circumstances that she was living through. And this poor girl had to move on with her life after being put down by this disdain. What do you think you are? That's what the family said. And she swallowed her pride and moved on. And she had to teach the Casimir's younger siblings, and she had to swallow her pride, as I said before, and she was devastated. And she wrote this letter to her brother. And I state, now that I have lost any faith to become something else, my spirit goes out to Bronia and yourself, and the gifts that we have as part of our family that should not be wasted. I feel very sorry for myself, but I am very proud of you, both of you. And these are the gifts that I have. That's what she meant. But I feel sorry for myself, and I will not be able to use them. And my hope is on you, my sister, and you, my dear brother. And Marie Curie could have been lost as part of our story many, many times. How many Marie Curies are out there because circumstances were so harsh, so difficult, so hard, impossible. It's the best term to try to identify what happened to all those that actually could go beyond these obstacles and climb mountains and find a way to move forward. This is marvelous. As Laura was saying, she was the first woman to be awarded a physics award and 2 Nobels, one in physics and one in chemistry, different categories. And there have been only 3 awards, Nobel Awards, for men, always for men. Pauline was the awardee for 2 categories, in physics, for example, or in chemistry. Pauline is the only one, similar to Marie Curie, that received this Nobel Prize in physics and chemistry. But we are talking about the peace Nobel in the case of this person, and anyone can receive that award as Kissinger's. So that is worthless. It's a worthless award. So Marie Curie is the only woman that has been awarded this Nobel recognition worldwide for 2 different categories, physics and chemistry. As Laura was saying, she was the first one to hold a teaching position at a university, and she was the first woman to teach at the Sorbonne in France, and she was groundbreaking. She was a pioneer in so many fronts that we could elaborate a very extensive list with that regard. I insist, however, that she was borderline depressed. So she finally made it to Paris. She had no money. She was not fitting herself well. And it was a very cold place where she slept at night. And it was so cold at night. She would put on all the clothes, all the garments on top of her, and a chair so that it could have some weight on her. It was kind of like a warming equipment device, if you will. And this is epic, part of the story that we have heard, providing her some comfort or consolation. And then she met Pierre. Pierre was an exceptional man that came to her life, and it was somehow the greatest destiny for her. And he was a brilliant scientist, a genius, without any doubt, but he was a peculiar character, somehow outside the society, dyslexic, studied at home during his educational years, and he had not pursued a PhD, for example, but a huge name in science anyway. So she started working on her PhD, and then Pierre would come aboard to get his own PhD. And they finally came about to extract some radium, and they were given the Physics Nobel Award next to Becquerel. But this is very important. I need to mention this. Turns out that Pierre Curie was called to receive, well, both with Becquerel, the award. And Pierre Curie, which is a merit given the time we're talking about, stated that under no circumstances would he accept a Nobel Prize, given that it had been Marie's idea and Marie's project as part of her dissertation, her PhD thesis or doctorate dissertation. And he said that she should be part of it. Otherwise, he would not be accepting it under no circumstances. Then there was an internal debate amongst the jurors, and they decided to give this award to the three of them. But Pierre and Marie were one when it comes to the grant. Furthermore, Marie could not come up to the podium for the appreciation message and the Nobel, he, his wife all the time. So they were tender to one another. They loved one another. And there's a grief diary that truly depicts the duel that she was suffering and the type of relationship that they had. This was marvelous. And Pierre was very sick before he was run over by this cart. And he was sick because of radiation. One of the most amazing things that, well, there's two situations that we understand pretty well when it comes to Marie Curie's life. The first one, because the second one will be elaborated afterwards, but the first one is the her resistance to actually accepting that radium was radioactive. She invented the word. She coined the term radioactivity. But everyone was enthusiastic about this discovery, that it was kind of like the God's fire that had been discovered, and apparently they had discovered this fire and taken it somehow from the gods, from the deities that for so many years had cured everyone, the fire curing people symbolically, but radium could cure people, but it was lethal in the long term. But it was kind of like the strength of life, and they had discovered this strength of life. And there was this radioactive wool clothing and garments for babies, apparently. Well, can you picture that? This is tremendous. This is something for example, pneumonia cases or babies that were sick, and they were covered under these garments that had this radium wool interwoven. And this was kind of like a deceit, and a self-deceit, we should say. And consequences were understood later. Pierre Curie and Marie Curie, in fact, worked on animals. And they recorded everything, and they said that animals died, and they wrote down all this information because of radioactivity. But they never had that leap from, for example, accepting that it would affect animals, and it did not accept human beings. But the truth of the matter is that it did affect human beings as well. But this was something they neglected all the way to a certain extent. And after many years, this was obvious. It was dangerous, this radioactivity effect. And laboratories started to have, well, after Pierre Curie, I should say, passed away, rigid regulations were implemented. And Marie Curie, at her own lab, with the employees, followed every single rule except for her. And her older daughter, she had two daughters. The older one, Irene, that was also awarded with Monsieur Joliot Nobel Prize. There are some pictures that relate to her 30s, no, in the 30s, 1930s, sucking on some radioactive components or elements. And that was from one, for example, container to the next within the lab. This is amazing. And we understand that she had leukemia. At 67, she was a very affected woman, and her sight had also been compromised. And leukemia was the diagnosis due to radioactive exposure. And her daughter, Irene, was 59 when she died with radioactive related disease. And the third daughter, Eve, that was a musician. She was a musician and she was a writer, and she lived 103 years. She never got any close to radium. And the mother, Madame Curie, was so resilient. She lived to be 67 years of age, despite the fact that she died of this radium. They were in love with radium, Pierre and herself. They would go to that warehouse I talked about before to see how fluorescent, how shiny radium was. And they had a flame, a radium flame. It was kind of like a bottle with this element at their bedside, at their nightstand. And they would have that radioactive component that was part of their lives. It became part of their lives. Pierre Curie was very sick. His bones were very affected. He was in pain all the time. And as doctors say, when they have no idea what's going on, said that he was neurasthenic and he was stressed out and he was very nervous and he was making up all these ailments. However, radium is what killed him, not so much the cart, the horse-ridden cart. He was, of course, very weak, and that's why this accident came about. So, the diary that includes this howling message to the world, it's a grieving conveyed message. They, as related in the diary, went to the prairies and they were walking outside. They were resting over the weekend, and Eva was a baby back then, and she was carrying the baby because Pierre was very sick back then. And they were walking, and I quote, "We had Eve in our arms first. I carried her, and then my husband carried her. And we were observing the flowers and the prairies. And I wanted you to be covered and protected. You said that I was crazy, but I, of course, took off my clothes so that you could sit on the floor. My petticoat as cover for you." This is a scene that is very touching. It's a moving one, moving her petticoat away, and she was the knight, the ancient knight, so that the demoiselle would not wet her feet. This is the contrary what happened during these paragraphs that we can read and understand the level of grief. She took care of his health because he was very compromised. He was very sick, actually. So there were ponds and there was water on the ground, and she wanted to protect him all the time with her petticoat or underskirt or any garment that could protect him in any way. We have to take into consideration that this was an era man, a man that truly belonged to his era. He did not do anything at home. I am referring to the household activities. So Madame Curie, in addition to taking care of her children, both girls, had to do the housework and prepare food, any meals, for example, for her husband and all of them. And she worked on conservatives and jams and marmalades as chemistry formulations. But basically, we have found this type of information, and it's pretty detailed. She was in charge of the household from an overall standpoint. She was about to get crazy, to lose it, actually, when the second child was born, because one was breastfeeding and Irene was a toddler, basically, and she was about to lose it, actually. There was a track down symptom. She was speaking, she was working at the laboratory, and she would run like crazy because she was anguished, she was exhausted, and she was about to be lost again. We, as I mentioned before, have been very close to losing her many times throughout her lives. And she was taking care of the children. She was mixing this pot I talked to you about that had this radioactive component. But, well, Pierre's mother passed away. Pierre's mother, her mother-in-law, and her father-in-law moved to her house. and he would help her with the children. Otherwise, we would have lost her again because of this over demanding type of life that she had. She was very harsh on herself, very strict, very rigid. And Pierre's husband, of course, was part of this story, but he could not help at home. And when they got married, she asked Pierre's mom, given that she had decided, the mother-in-law, to give her her gown, her wedding gown, as a gift. And she wanted it to be black and very practical because that would be the one she would wear later on at her life. This is the type of life that she has. She would wear no makeup, she would not fix her hair, and so forth. So it comes as no surprise for her to reject the outer look. Being a woman back then would be kind of like a reminder for everyone. I am a woman. That would not help. She had to be as male as possible because of the circles that she was surrounded by, the life that she had. There's a piece of documentary that's a letter from Einstein. Einstein was a very close friend of Marie, younger, of course, than Marie, and he admired her quite extensively. They were good friends. But Einstein had a second wife, and he wrote a letter in 2013, and this is Marie Curie's cousin. And this is a letter, of course, that he wrote, kind of like flirting with the cousin, with Marie Curie's cousin. And he states, I quote, Marie Curie is very intelligent. She's a bright girl, but she's very cold. So she has no sentiment, no feelings. The only way to talk about something or to express her feelings is by slandering and criticizing. And her son, Irene, is also gifted, but she also is scarce when it comes to emotions. Well, cold as a fish. That's what he said, Einstein. Cold as a fish? Of course not. She was passionate. She was a volcanic force from within. However, she had to control herself. And, well, actually, having Mr. Einstein understand that aspect of her life was kind of like a success. She succeeded in her aim to look as male as possible. So they got this Nobel Prize, and there was a lot of fame around them. And Pierre's accident came about. This was, of course, a terrific part of their story. And she was alone with her daughters, and she was destroyed. And then she started to give classes, and her life was not easy. The daughters were very young back then. And 4 years after Pierre passed away in 1906, so in 1910, when she was 42, she was 38 when Pierre died, and she fell in love again, cold as a fish, as stated by Einstein. And Pierre Boulogne was the French guy she fell in love with. He was superb as a scientist, but as a man, he was kind of like a jerk. He was a jerk. He was very handsome. He was 37, 5 years younger than Marie, with a great mustache as a brigadier or a lieutenant. Casimir, the Polish, was very handsome. Pierre Curie was not an ugly man himself, so she was attracted by attractive, handsome men. So she fell in love as a young girl, a young teenager would do. And she was very happy. She, of course, well, this gave some life back. And he had a wife and children, but it was a toxic relationship. They had separated from one another, and they were together again, and they would hit one another. And the wife apparently was very violent, a very violent woman. This French scientist's wife we're talking about. And there was a moment when she found out that her husband, this intermittent husband, because he would go back and forth in the relationship, found out that they were having an affair, and she and her sister, the wife and her sister, kind of like threatened Marie Curie one night, and it was a very serious event. And Marie Curie and the French man were having this affair, and I will read one letter. The letter that talks about as cold as a fish, the one that, according to Einstein, is cold as a fish. When I know that you are with her, and I quote, my nights are atrocious. I can't sleep, maybe 2-3 hours. And I wake up feeling feverish. Please complete that situation. I can no longer live what we are currently living through. Finish that relationship and don't come from your bedroom separated from your wife. Never go look for her unless she comes to you and asks for your companionship. Always tell her that you are working and you have to work late. Please tell her that you don't want to be with her. So, and I end the quote of this love letter. Marie Curie was lost. She had lost her head over this Frenchman. This person was no subject for confidence. No one could rely on him. And Marie Curie wrote these letters, and the French husband left them on a table, on the side table. And in 1911, the wife discovered them, and she published the letters in the newspapers in France. So Pierre Curie and Marie Curie, who was Polish of origin, had been awarded, and she was the French glory in the world of science. But once these letters were discovered and sent out to the newspapers, she was no longer a French glory. She was a foreign, an alien, and she was Polish. And well, they started slandering her name. And this is a text from the newspaper. This woman, coming from another country, pretends to talk on behalf of science with a transcendental idea under which we see how monstrous she is. And this woman is now using up the husband, the children, and the wife. So now who is adulterous? Who is handling this? Who is managing all the situation? Well, according to the newspapers, she was the worst. She was the monster. So there was a movement for her to be expelled from La Sorbonne in France and from the country. And there were some people that tried to force her out. And she had to hide with the children. And she was about to be lynched by groups of people. And the Nobel Prize was awarded to her, and then the scandal the next day. So, of course, the Nobel Prize jurors said that having read about this very adverse incident, the letters I mean, would no longer be the awardee. And this is the letter she wrote. You are asking for a very serious answer from my behalf. I discover radium and polonium. There's no connection between my scientific work and the private life events. And I cannot accept the idea that a scientific value could be slandered by my private life's events. And I rest assured that many people will share this idea with us. And maybe you are amongst all those that criticize and slander. And she, of course, picked up the award. She went up to the podium and she spoke directly and straightforward to everyone present there. And she said, that 15 years ago, and I quote, 15 years ago, uranium radiation by Henry Becquerel discovered, and 2 years afterwards, this was an invention that was further experimented by myself and by Pierre. And everybody's or components that have radiation were coined by myself, my intuition, my science. is what relates to radioactivity. And after that speech, she was, of course, devastated, and she was about to commit suicide. She left her children with some friends and she disappeared. She was out of the picture. But she stood up, she collected herself, she went back to the laboratory, and she continued with her life. And during the First World War, she created units that were called the Petite Curie. So that the Petite Curie for these radioactive components to be transported. And I think we have time now for a Q&A session, but let me wrap my presentation by saying the following. We have the macho era back in the time that stated that Pierre Curie was the one that was worth it. We are talking about one of the 10 most important scientists in their life, in the history. That was during the first part of his life, but not during the second part of his life. Now we are talking about Pierre, and when he passed away, we understand that Marie Curie continued with that trend, but she was the one all the time. And we are talking about a a chemistry teacher that was obnoxious and that wrote this type of comments. And this is the father, Marie Curie's father. And then she, of course, sent a letter to her dad saying this. And he wrote back to her, well, after so much work, well, excellent. Thank you. Finally, so sad, it's useless. That's what he wrote. And 2 days afterwards, he passed away. So Marie Curie started to working about, for example, the radium to cure cancer, for X-rays and X-ray plates, so that it could be actually implemented and used, because her dad had told her that it was useless. Now, all this information, where is it? Well, we have the French library that includes documents. Yes, they have archived all these articles, and I think that all this information is also at the Pasteur library, and we have all these pieces of work, for example, documents and records that have a lot of radioactive components to them, and they are kept in an iron box. Oh, the tattoo, you want to see my tattoo and what it means? Well, I have many. Let me share this one. I have many. I have tattoos all over my body, but I think these are the ones that you would like to see. I have some birds right here. This one over here, it states sapere aude by Horatio, but Kant made it more famous. And it's a motto that says, dare to know, above your prejudice and biases, and outside your comfort zone, always follow the truth. And of course, we have the relativity formula. I love science, and this is what represented me somehow when I got this tattoo, the relativity law, the formula, I should say. More questions? No questions? I think the chat is frozen. Okay, we're just waiting for some questions to come. And beforehand, we were talking about Curie's diary and where it was kept, with the answer of Rosa Montero as part of this library in France. And, well, after World War I, the awareness of the society changed somehow. So how did Marie Curie change you? That's another question. Well, books should teach you. Otherwise, they have no meaning or a meaning in your life. What I loved about Marie Curie, what fascinated me, is her resilience to push mountains away. And that resistance, that strength, that tenacious character beyond the impossible makes her a hero, a true hero. And I think this is a shot of faith. She's a heroine, and if you try to give your best, you will very likely get to where you want to be. Of course, there's a major investment on your part, energy, of course, but if you work in that direction, it's very likely that you will actually get it. And we have her wit and her marvelous brain, and she was obsessive. I am obsessive as well. Of course, we have to understand that there's a major difference between her and myself, but this finger, the ring finger, is longer. It's not witchcraft or magic. This is science-based evidence by Liverpool and other universities. Most of the women have this index letter that is longer than the ring finger. However, it can be the opposite, and that is more testosterone in the uterus. And if you give more testosterone to mice, for example, laboratory mice, you will have the ring finger being more extended. But there are some men that have feminine hands because of the length of the fingers, such as Beckham. Beckham has this difference in the length of his fingers, and some women have the opposite. That would be the ring finger as opposed to the index. And Marie Curie had it as well. That's another coincidence. Many coincidences between her life and my life and others. Other studies, for example, the Oxford study that tried to depict or describe what this relates to, for example, more promiscuous, the longer your ring finger is, more sports related activities, and for example others. But I think that this is not as reliable. We understand that we have certain plasticity when it comes to our brains, and we can compare to one another, but not all the time. What would Curie say regarding the children of this era? I have no idea what she would say regarding the children of the society as it is. Maybe she would be very pleased with the progress of women. She never talked about feminism. She was not a feminist. She talked not that well about women, and I understand this pretty well. We are talking about the suffragettes and a very well armed, structured feminist front. But it was not possible for her to be at every single front. She didn't want to be the victim here, but evidently she was aware of the situation. So I understand that the sole fact of having more access to education, in spite of it all, in spite of equalities that we still have, but more in the past, of course, would be seen favorably by her. And she never recognized the dangers of radium to humanity. She never did. She never recognized that. And there's a statement. Which statement or which saying would I have as a memory of Curie? Well, a couple of Christmas before she died, because she was anguished, she was a perfectionist, and she was also depressed and anxious. But 2 years before she died, she wrote a letter to her daughter Irene. And she said that she was pleased, she was happy, and she said that living light at present times is similar to a state of grace. It's very similar to a state of grace. I don't have the exact quote, but this is basically what she said. Trying to live light in the present is similar to a state of grace. And I love that. I don't want to be anguished. I don't want to be anxious. Being perfectionist, of course, is something that I relate myself to when it comes to my comparison to Marie Curie. And she actually made it in that way. And some greetings to Kusei, to the engineering university. This is a special greeting to all the female students at the exact science and engineering at the Guadalajara State University. You are cracks. My God, you can do anything you want. No one out there would ever tell you that you can't do, or you can't do it, or you can't actually get there. For example, people that work in robotics or engineers or AI, artificial intelligence, and exact sciences. Oh my God. What else can I say about that? When it comes to math, we have Clara Grimal. She's amazing here in Spain. And all the scientists, girls, we can eat the world. The world is ours. My regards, my admiration, and my hope to all these new generations that are actually changing the world. Keep it up. Are there any more questions? Or are we done with this interview? I wouldn't know. No more questions. And this was a 45 talk, and we are at the 49th minute of our interview, and I had a great time. I do hope that you could now understand Madame Curie's life and her fate, that could help us somehow to open up our eyes, indicating the road ahead. Women, science is in your hands, and science is one of the most important drivers, the most important engines in the world. So never accept any comment. You can picture Marie Curie and her daughter Irene, that were very gifted, as Mr. Einstein said many times. And enjoy the rest of the International Book Fair in Guadalajara. Thank you. Kisses and hugs to all of you. Thank you.